Hello YouTube. I wanted to take a few minutes this evening and talk about a method of canning known as oven canning or dry canning. There's been a lot of hype and hyperbole online about why you should not dry can. I'll address those concerns and the reasons why you should dry can. The first most prevalent argument is your jars will break in your oven. Dry canning is a method in which you put your product in a jar in an oven that is 200 to 225 degrees. And you process for an hour or more depending on the size of jar and the product that you're using. So let's think about that for a second. Water bath canning entails putting your product in a jar in boiling water, which is 212 to 225 degrees. Steam canning is a much higher temperature of canning, and pressure cooking, of course, is a high temperature for canning, and you're adding pressure. All of those methods are far above the point of boiling water, and they're far above the point of oven canning or dry canning. So if it were the case that putting your jars into a 200 to 225 degree oven would break your jars, any other methods of preserving your food in jars would have you breaking jars right and left. This is certainly not the case, especially for seasoned canners such as myself. The only reason you would lose a jar of product is if you weren't paying attention. If you put a cold jar of product into a hot environment immediately, of course you're going to lose a jar. If you're using jars that are a little past their prime, meaning they've been used over and over and over again, it results in weak glass and you'll lose jars. You just need to be on top of how many times you've used your jars, the age of your jars, and whether or not recycled glass has gone into the making of your jars. More and more as we enter the recycling world, manufacturers of canning jars are trying to slip in a little recycled glass. This is resulting in jar failure right and left, in much the same way that Corningware several years ago changed their recipe for their products, with the result of Corningware breaking and exploding right and left. They've gone back to their original recipe, but unfortunately they've lost a lot of customers, myself included. When you go out looking for jars, especially if you hit like antique malls, garage sales, estate sales, you want to be very careful. If you're looking at colored glass jars, that's Depression era glass, and you can store your product in it, just don't can with it, because the rate of failure in those jars is astronomically high. If you're buying new jars, make sure that the packaging does not say made with X amount of recycled glass. Make sure that it's first run glass, which means that the glass, it's the first time it's been made into glass, and it's made specifically for canning. Now, oven canning has a little leeway in what you can use for jars. You see right here, this is just a regular Best Foods mayonnaise jar. Hellmann's mayonnaise for those of you east of the Rockies. Regular mouth lids and bands fit perfectly on these. And of course, if you're a die-hard recycler, you've saved the lid. So when you open your jar of product, you can just pop the original plastic lid on your jar and keep things out. Another argument about oven canning is that not all of the oxygen is removed from the product when you process it. True, it isn't. It's also the case that not all the oxygen is removed when you steam can or pressure cook or vacuum seal or use oxygen absorbers in your buckets. You're not eliminating all the oxygen. You are, however, eliminating enough of the oxygen that you're not going to end up with a gamey product or a product that's going to have bugs or insects in it. The heat processing alone kills any larvae that may happen to be in your product at the time of processing. So you're not going to get a jar filled with cobwebs and worms when you go to pop it open. They've been killed in the heating process. Another argument against oven canning is that you lose a lot of your basic nutrition and vitamins. I will concede that point. You do lose nutrition and vitamins. You also lose nutrition and vitamins when you water bath can, when you steam can, when you pressure cook, when you dehydrate, when you freeze dry. You're going to lose some nutrition and you're going to lose some vitamins. The basic methods of canning and oven canning are almost within 3 points of each other versus the loss of nutrition and vitamins. So that portion of the argument becomes a non-argument in my mind. So everything has O2 in it, regardless of how well you've processed. Oxygen is just part of the environment. For us, basically it becomes a matter of portion control. And that should be an issue for anybody who is going into this with a quote-unquote survival bent on it. You can buy bulk, and I recommend that people buy bulk wherever possible because you're going to save a lot of money. However, what you do with that bulk item from the point of your purchase is what is going to determine how much of that product you're going to use. You can buy bulk containers of rice and beans and flours and oatmeals, all dressed up in nice 5-gallon buckets. But then you have to realize if you're not a family of 5 or higher, there's no way you're going to get to the bottom of that bucket before you're going to have humidity, bugs, dirt, any one of a number of things. And if you're in a survival situation, chances are you're going to have all of those things to contend with on an almost daily basis. Putting things up in smaller portions in jars like this, if a bug happens to get in here or this happens to get wet, I haven't lost that much product. So I'm not heartbroken about losing a little bit of product versus losing half a bag of product. Things that you can dry can. Dry goods like flours. This is a semolina pasta flour. I don't make pasta very often. So canning it up like this is about 2 batches of pasta right here. I'm not going to freak out if I happen to use half the jar and come back 6 months later and there's something in there. Okay, well, I've lost maybe a cup and a half of semolina flour. I'm not going to panic. Rices, brown rice, white rice. This is a half gallon of lentils here. You can wheat berries if you don't bake on a constant basis. It becomes real efficient to can up just the amount that you would need to make a couple batches, a couple loaves of bread. Cornmeal cans up, dry cans really nicely. Any whole beans, any legumes. The point is it has to be absolutely dry. You can't use a damp product, otherwise you end up with a rotted product when you go to open your jar, or you end up with a product that's rock solid and you can't get it out of your jar. Things that you can't dry can: sugars, powdered milks, anything damp, like I said. Coffee creamer, powdered coffee creamer, that contains milk solids and fats. It becomes this large, gelatinous, gloppy, hard, rocky mass in the bottom of your jar. You end up just throwing the jar away because you can't get the product out. Herbs and vegetables, if you've dehydrated your own herbs, dehydrated your own vegetables, dried mushrooms, carrots, potatoes, whatever you've happened to dry, you cannot dry can them. Your product will end up absolutely black when it comes out. Nuts. I've seen a couple videos online where people have oven canned nuts. This is pretty much, in my mind, a crapshoot because while some people may have the science down, others who are just dry canning as a point of preference, you're going to end up with a product that is absolutely rancid when you go to open it because those nuts contain oils, and the oil will go rancid very quickly once it's been cooked and processed. So that's basically it. The reason I do it is for portion control. It also gives us a wide variety of things to choose from, as opposed to you open one 5-gallon bucket of this, a 5-gallon bucket of that. You got another couple 5 gallons of oatmeal and white flour over there. Then you have to think, okay, now I have a set amount of time that I have to go through those buckets before I lose them due to moisture and bugs. Whereas this, I can have many different jars open at one time, and I've got some variety. I've got a little bit of variety to work with, and it kind of just broadens out our meals that we can make on a regular basis. Pastas dry can very nicely because they're already a dried product. The only problem with pastas are, unless you're using like small, say like couscous or something like that, if you have like large egg noodle pasta or big macaronis, those take up a lot of space in a jar, whereas just putting them in a vacuum seal bag and throwing them in a survival bucket like I've done in my previous video is there's a little more leeway there. So hopefully that gives you all something to think about. Oven canning, it's just another arrow in the quiver of tools that we have. They all have their merits, they all have their drawbacks, but oven canning and dry canning, it has just as much merit as any other form of canning. It's easy to do. If you have an oven and you have jars, you can oven can. Regular canning, that takes a little bit of an investment there, especially if you're going to get a really nice canner like an All-American. There's a large amount of money involved there. This is real simple. It's easy to do. It's relatively inexpensive, and it's a good way for you to concentrate on portion control versus having to go through a huge bag of product before it goes bad. Thank you very much.